Start by using a 10mm socket or wrench, and we're going to go ahead and loosen the battery terminal clamps here and disconnect these terminals. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and loosen these 3 10mm bolts on the water pump pulley. We're just going to loosen them. We're not going to remove them. I'm going to go ahead and get a 10mm wrench down in there. In order to do this here, we're also going to use a 15/16 socket on the alternator bolt here in conjunction with this, because as we start to move the bolt, as we start to move this bolt, you're going to see the pulley start to move and the belt will rotate with it. That bolt there actually loosened a little bit, but we can also use this socket on the ratchet to go ahead and rotate this around so we can get to the other bolts. And once you get all these bolts loose, we're going to move on to the alternator. All right. I want to go ahead and disconnect these 3 connectors for the alternator. We're going to pinch this tab down and wiggle that connector free. Next, we're going to come on over to this back rubber cap, peel that up, and that's going to expose a 10mm. And go ahead and spin that nut right off. Be careful not to drop that down, so be prepared once that comes loose. Grab it with your fingertip, set that aside, and go ahead and disconnect that harness right there. Next, we want to get to this connector here, another rubber boot. Peel up that boot, and there's a tab on that. You want to press on that tab and pull that connector up and out. Now there's a little plastic tab right here. If your vehicle has this harness connector, just a little spring tab, pull it back, wiggle it, and that'll loosen that up, so that'll give you a little more room to work. Using a 19mm socket, I want to go ahead and put it on this here, and this is the tensioner for this belt. We want to go ahead and remove this belt now. So we're going to put the socket on there with a Serpentine Belt tool, and we're going to slowly push this to the rear of the vehicle And this is a hydraulic style belt tensioner, so we're going to slowly do it. You can see the belt come loose, and just work that off. Pop that down, and then slowly bring that back. And remove your tool. So in order to remove the alternator, we need to remove the 2 bolts. There's one right here. And then the second one is down underneath the pulley, just beside the hydraulic belt tensioner. So let's go ahead and use a 12mm socket, and we're going to go ahead and get those loose. I'm going to have that one loose, and we're going to go ahead and break the other one free. Once they're loose, I'm going to go ahead and remove the lower one completely by hand. There's one of them there. Try and spin out that upper one here. Looks like we'll have to get that ratchet back on there and stick in a little bit. And we just switched over to a shallow socket for clearance purposes because we were hitting the motor mount there. Now with both bolts removed, go ahead and pivot that alternator. And just remove that. Now the 3 bolts that we previously loosened on the water pump pulley is going to come into benefit right here. You can now go ahead and loosen these bolts, and you want to go ahead and remove them. We want to go ahead and pull that pulley off. So go ahead and remove all 3 of these and take that pulley off of the water pump. With those 3 bolts removed, you should be able to work that water pump pulley off. You might be able to put a small pry bar or screwdriver behind the water pump and just pop that off. And the reason for that is that on the front flange of that water pump might be a little bit of rust or something on there. Just want to get that pulley off past that flange. I'm going to take the pulley off and set that aside. I'm going to have to remove the wheel. Our particular vehicle has a locking lug nut here. We already loosened that. I'm going to go ahead and take the wheel off. So we're going to go ahead and remove these two plastic clips right here, just to gain access behind this plastic cover. Just tuck that down to the side. And I want to go ahead and remove this Allen head bolt using a number 8 Allen. We're going to use a pivoting head ratchet to get inside here. And this bolt is the main bolt that holds the belt tensioner bracket to the front of the engine. So we went ahead and switched out to a 1/2-inch drive breaker bar and a ratchet unit here with a socket. It eliminated a lot of the flex out of this here and allowed us to get this bolt free from the tensioner.
Oh, that's good.
Go ahead and use that 12 millimeter. Now this is the last bolt, so as you're removing that, you want to hold on to the tensioner, remove that bolt completely. And pull that unit out. And just work it out of the car. I'm going to go ahead and remove the radiator cap. This is going to help us with the draining process of the coolant before we remove the bolts on the water pump. I want to go underneath and drain the radiator. Right under the lower front center, you're going to find your radiator drain. You're going to go ahead and turn that counterclockwise. Make sure you have a catch can ready to go, otherwise fluid's going to go everywhere. And turn that till it starts dripping a little bit. and we'll go ahead and let that drain out. All right, once you have the radiator drain, we're going to go ahead and tighten up the drain plug. And once it gets to the bottom there, just kind of snug it up. And that's it. We're going to go ahead and remove the serpentine belt. Pull that down out of the way. And there's going to be some bolts on the bottom of the water pump. There's one right here. There's one just to the right of it. And then there's one up to the upper left. These are all 10 millimeter. These are the ones you can get to from the bottom. And then there's a couple up top. We're going to get those next. Now we do have a drain pan underneath the motor because the water pump might have some residual coolant in it. So you want to put a catch can there. When you're working underneath the vehicle like this here, it's always strongly suggested to have some safety glasses on. Not only are you gonna have to worry about debris falling off of the vehicle, but you don't want to have any residual coolant leaking out and splashing and getting in your eyes. With the 3 lower bolts now removed, let's move up top and get the other 2. With all the bolts removed, I'm going to go ahead and just tap this little ear of the water pump with a hammer just to break that seal. You can see the coolant coming down. Make sure you have your drain pan underneath. So now, with the water pump loose, you can go ahead and grab it, flex it a little bit. You can see the rubber gasket separating from the engine. Go ahead and pull that up and set that aside. Now what we want to do is go ahead and inspect the surface of where the water pump is going to be replaced. You want to go ahead and clean it, make sure that the surface itself is free of any debris, any residual rubber from the old gasket. So we're just using a flat razor here. You can use a gasket scraper. We're just kind of cleaning the surface. We had a little bit of residual garbage around the edges here, and I'm gently dragging it. I don't want to cut into it because it is aluminum. Once you have the surface wiped up, we can go ahead and start with the installation process. All we're doing now is making sure that the surface is clean and dry. Now, understanding the orientation of the water pump to where it goes onto the engine, the neck comes up at an angle here. We have our new gasket. I'm going to go ahead and line this up. And set this into place. I'm going to go ahead and line this up on the engine and then start installing the bolts. Now what I'm going to try and do is thread this bolt down as far as I can by hand. Should get pretty close to bottoming out. And do the same with the upper one. While holding pressure on the water pump, that's going to keep that gasket in that groove. All we're going to do right now is just kind of snug up these upper bolts. Just a little bit. And then we're going to go ahead and raise the vehicle and get to the last two underneath. We'll snug those up and then we'll come back and torque them. I'm going to go ahead and torque these down to 8.7 foot-pounds. And we're going to continue to do this for all 5 bolts. I'm going to raise the vehicle and get to the bottom too. So if you have the ability to go ahead and get in there and torque this, you want to go ahead and torque the 2 lower bolts to the 8.7 pounds as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and feed the tensioner down and around. I'm going to go ahead and get the bolt started. For the tensioner itself. And we're just going to thread that in as far as we can by hand. Once we get that as far as we can, we're going to go ahead and raise up the vehicle and get the lower bolt into the tensioner. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take that Allen bolt, feed that through, and you're just going to wiggle this mount or the unit into place and catch some threads. I like to thread these in as far as I can. It'll prevent any cross threading. Next, you want to go ahead and grab your number 8 Allen head. You can go ahead and start tightening that up. All right, we're just going to snug that. I'm going to go ahead and torque this to 40 foot-pounds. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the old belt completely. Just kind of slide that by the front of the power steering pump, and we'll drop that out. We'll take the new belt, slide that up, feed that up and around the front of the power steering pump pulley. And we'll go ahead and feed the rest of the belt up. And now hold itself in place. Okay, so we're now starting to route the new belt. We're going to go ahead and install the water pump pulley. We're going to get these bolts just snugged up by hand. We're going to finish routing the belt and get that belt installed, and then we're going to finish up by tightening up these 3 water pump bolts. So I'll grab one of these bolts here. So we can get this lined up. All right, now that we have all 3 of the water pump pulley bolts all bottomed out by hand, we're now going to go ahead and torque the adjuster bolt here to 17 foot-pounds. And now we're going to go ahead and route the belt. You can find the routing for your belt maybe in your owner's manual. Now that we have the belt run around most of our main accessories, we need to go ahead and reinstall the alternator so we can finish that belt routing process. Make sure you have your harnesses out of the way. And go ahead and work the alternator back in. Go ahead and take that long bolt and line that up, and I'm going to work this alternator into the bracket. I'm going to go ahead and get the bolt started a few threads, but I'm not going to tighten it. I'm going to leave it loose so we can go ahead and make sure we can get the other bolt in. Put a little dab of anti-seize on that end of the bolt. All right, so we're going to go ahead and snug up that lower, shorter alternator bolt. And once this is tightened up, I'm going to go ahead and tighten up the upper bolt. And go ahead and just snug that down. I want to go ahead and get back underneath, double check the routing of the belt, make sure it's around everything that it needs to be. We'll go ahead and get that adjuster moved, and we'll get that belt on there nice and tight. Now that we have the belt routed in its correct position, the last we have to do is we have our tensioner tool on. We're going to slowly lift up because it is a hydraulic unit. I'm going to slowly bring this up. That's going to allow for some play in this belt. Once we get this lined up, I'm going to slide that on. Make sure that the belt is lined up on the other pulleys along the sides, and slowly release. You want to go around and double check and make sure that the belt is on all of the pulleys, all of the guides, the tensioner, and everything before you start up the vehicle. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the plastic shield here. Take the push button base, push that in. And go ahead and get those studs lined up. Pop that wheel on. I'm going to go ahead and get all of the lug nuts started by hand, and then we'll snug them down. Let's go ahead and reconnect the alternator. I'm going to go ahead and take the round cap here, peel that back, get that lug lined up, push it down and on. I'm going to go ahead and get our 10mm nut put on there. I'm going to go ahead and just snug that down and press that rubber boot back over on that. Next, we're going to take our green connector, line that up, press it down, and you'll hear an audible click of that securing, and then get that rubber boot lined up and press that down and into place. Take your electrical connector, plug that together, and then don't forget to connect the harness here onto the mounting tab. There you go. Now let's go ahead and get the terminals hooked up. Get your negative on there, pop the positive on, and then we're just going to use our 10mm wrench to go ahead and snug these up. I'm going to go ahead and start adding your antifreeze. You want to make sure you're using your Honda antifreeze or whatever is approved for the manufacturer specifications. All right, so now that we have the radiator full, it's filled up to the top, I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna put the cap on. And we're not gonna lock it, we're just gonna get it to its first notch. So we don't wanna make it tight, just to the first safety notch so that the tabs are securing the cap. Next, we wanna go ahead and look in the coolant reservoir tank, make sure there is sufficient coolant in there. And you can check your min and max level on the side, and we can see that it is actually up to its proper level, so that's good. So we'll go ahead and resecure that cap on there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start the vehicle. We're going to let it warm up and let the fan cycle through a couple times, and then we'll go ahead and double check the coolant and get that cap secured. So we did go ahead and remove the radiator cap. It was not hot at this time. You never want to remove a hot engine radiator cap, but it was still cold. We opened it up and we could add some coolant to this. So I want to go ahead and do so. Once again, we'll just top it off and then we're going to put the radiator cap back on.